Hey, it's Brett, and this is Brett and Some Books. Today we are continuing Plot to Seize the White House, whether little Leon wants us to or not. That's the cat! This is Chapter 17, Part 2. Back home, Butler winced when Lejeune asked him to take command of the Paris Island, South Carolina base. Weary after his China stint, he felt the need to renew his ties with kith and kin in his hometown of Westchester. He talked of retiring. "I had better begin to think what is best for me and my family," he told Lejeune. "I have given over 30 years of my best to the Marine Corps." He was given a long leave home, where he became aware of a rising tide of American sentiment matching his own growing distrust of the reasons for which armed forces were sent overseas. It had begun with a belated disillusionment over World War I, sparked by such books as All Quiet on the Western Front and Merchants of Death. In 1925, a National Committee on the Cause and Cure of War had been founded, and rapidly developing pacifist movement had compelled the government to enter disarmament negotiations. By August 1928, the anti-war movement was worldwide. Assigned once more to command the base at Quantico, Butler made it a Marine showplace and developed Marine football, baseball, and basketball teams with such high esprit de corps that they played the best college teams of the East and often beat them. His fatherly interest in his men led him to develop them with personal problems, get them out of trouble, and encourage them to write home. The admiration of the Marines' families was expressed in a typical letter to him from Philadelphia. "My brother in the Marines just came back from Nicaragua, and he asked to transfer to Philadelphia. His mother was ill, and you complied with his wishes. His mother was operated for tumbers, but it was a baby boy, and to date it was christened Smedley D Butler, Ruth." Military and patriotic organizations persistently sought to lure him into joining. He wired the Sons of the American Revolution, "My ancestors were all Quakers, and I regret to say they took no part, as far as I know, in the American Revolutionary War. So I am not entitled to be a son of the American Revolution." Actually, recently discovered evidence indicates that his great-great-grandfather, William Butler, although a Quaker, probably served in the Revolution along with 3 brothers. He did, however, finally yield to the pleas of the American Legion official James D. Dyan that he attend the National Convention in Scranton as a guest of honor. "The success of the 11th National Convention last week was in part due," Dyan wrote him gratefully afterward, "to the fact that you were our guest. The Legionnaires are all for you." Next came that John Lejeune was resigning as commandant to head the Virginia Military Academy and would be replaced by Butler's other old friend, Buck Neville, now a major general. 30 years had gone by since they had been an inseparable trio in the feverish days of the Cuban campaign. Butler began to feel the weight of time and too many campaigns. The endless demands on him made retirement and rest seem alluring. Asked once too often for a speech, he replied in October 1929, "I am not a crusader or a propagandist, nor have I a message for anybody, so there is no object in my appearing anywhere, except for money." He began to charge stiff lecture fees to cut down demands for him to travel everywhere, to address luncheons and meetings as a guest of honor. Perusing the morning papers on October 2nd, he noted a statement by Charles E. Mitchell of the National City Bank. "I know nothing fundamentally wrong with the stock market or with the underlying business and credit situation. The following day, there was a minor panic on the New York Stock Exchange, and a day later the market collapsed. On October 29th, the bottom fell out on the blackest day in the stock market history, and within 2 weeks, over $30 billion in stock values were wiped out. The Great Depression had begun, and with it a swift rush of events that would involve Smedley Butler in a fantastic plot to overthrow the American government. At first, the American people imagined that the stock market crash was something that merely affected Wall Street. In a message to Congress, President Hoover reassured them that there was nothing to worry about. Business confidence had been reestablished. Bootleggers, gang wars, and crime continued to be the major preoccupation of the public. Despite Butler's reluctance, more and more organizations insisted upon hearing the general, who never pulled his punches, speak out on the law and order problem. There was a groundswell in Pennsylvania to nominate Philadelphia's former crime buster for governor on the Republican ticket. A friend wrote from Washington, "I note that some of the politicos may draft you as a dictator for Washington." In December 1929, Butler was glad when a demand arose for a Senate investigation of the use of Marines to intervene in Latin American affairs. He upset the Hoover administration by shooting from the hip on an extemporaneous speech he made in Pittsburgh, revealing that the State Department had rigged the Nicaraguan elections of 1912 by ordering him to use strong-arm methods during the Marine intervention. "The opposition candidates in Nicaragua were declared bandits when it became necessary to elect our man to office," he explained. And he said of Diaz, "The fellow we had there nobody liked, but he was a useful fellow to us, so we had to keep him in. How to keep him in was the problem." Then he described how the election had been rigged under orders for that purpose. "When a Marine is told to do something," he said, "he does it." Butler's disclosures, picked up by the press, created a sensation in Washington. Alarm bells rang in the State Department. The last thing the administration wanted was an investigation concerning Marines then stationed in Nicaragua. Officials angrily attacked Butler for loose talk. Secretary of State Henry L. Stimson wrote a furious memo to Secretary of the Navy Charles Francis Adams. "If the remarks are authentic, I consider them a highly improper and false statement as to American policy, and that I should call it to your attention for appropriate action. There is nothing that can do this government more disservice than such a misstatement of our policy in Latin American country, and I am astounded that such an expression, if he is correctly quoted, should emanate from a commissioned officer of the United States." Navy Secretary Adams, a wealthy polo-playing yachtsman, sent for Butler and delivered a blistering reprimand, declaring that he was doing so at the direct personal order of the President of the United States. Butler saw red. "This is the first time in my service of 32 years, he snapped back, "that I've ever been hauled on the carpet and treated like an unruly schoolboy. I haven't always approved of the actions of the administration, but I've always faithfully carried out my instructions. If I'm not behaving well, it's because I'm not accustomed to reprimands, and you can't expect me to turn my cheek meekly for official slaps." "I think this will be all," Adams said icily. "I don't ever want to see you here again." "You never will if I can help it," Butler rasped, storming out of his office livid with anger. Just 2 days after his attack on the government's gunboat diplomacy, which provoked a great public commotion, Under-Secretary of State J. Reuben Clark privately submitted to Secretary of State Simpson the draft of a pledge that the United States would never again claim the right to intervene in the affairs of any Latin American country as an, quote, international policeman, end quote. The Clark Memorandum, which later became official policy, for a while at least, repudiated the Theodore Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine that Smedley Butler had unmasked as raw gunboat diplomacy.